what is the functionality of city, and how does it operate given the pressures that we're facing on a global scale? But I also want to bring this into the context of the global south. And I did a quick word search on global south, okay? And the global south, the words I came back were kleptocracy, tin pot dictatorship, backwards, poverty, squalor, instability. And that was it. There was nothing positive. There was not one single positive word there. And of course, the global south, before the global south, we had the concept of the first world, second world, third world. And then we had the developed world, and then the underdeveloped world, and the undeveloped world. And now we have global north and global south. Well, what's interesting is the global south is a shorthand for non-effectiveness, for failing societies. Because they say, oh, the global south doesn't include Australia, doesn't include Japan, doesn't include South Korea, doesn't include South Africa. And so, well, that's in the global south. So the global south is a conceptual concept rather than a geographical one. But it has like so many code words, it has a hidden agenda behind it. Rem Koolhaas, who was a Dutch architect and conceptualist, wrote a paper in, I think, 1969 around Lagos. And what he said was, you've got to go to Lagos because I don't know if we've got anybody here from Nigeria. I don't know if you've been to Nigeria, if anybody's here. I spent 2.5 years in Nigeria I was basically running a company in Nigeria. But if anybody here has not been to Nigeria, please go to Nigeria if you have an opportunity. And the reason I say it, and I have a deep love for Nigeria, I genuinely do. But if you take craziness as from 1 to 20, Nigeria is about 146. It is just so far off the scale in terms of crazy. And then you go to Lagos, which takes it to another dimension completely. But if you think you have an understanding of what a city is and how a city works, and you haven't been to Lagos, you don't know what's going on. But the thing about Lagos is it is absolutely anarchic. It is completely anarchic. Every single thing you do, everything is based on negotiation. You have to negotiate a parking space, a phone line, where you park your car, how you get something fixed, to get a carpenter to come in, to something look after your kids, whatever it might be, you have to negotiate. And the world sees something like Lagos as basically unmanaged, chaotic, and anarchic. And Rem said no. He said, Koolhaas said no. It is actually incredibly functional. But it's not functional based on institutional management. It's based on everybody has to deal with what they're dealing with. And he said that basically what we're looking at, and he said this in 1969, we're looking at the future. The future is going to be Lagos. Because as we see the growth of these chaotic megacities, most of which are in the global south, I have to say, and pretty well all of which are on the coast as well. So we then have the idea of climate change, global warming, rising sea levels, and cities underwater, which we discussed yesterday. But the truth of the matter is that idea of a city as a self-managing organism, ecosystem, is not what we think of when we think of a city, a good city. We think of Geneva or Tokyo or Vancouver or London.
Or Vienna.
Right. So I want to start off with two things. First of all, I want to start off with why do we have this concept of the global south as basically failing, backward, inefficient, and somewhere you really, really don't want to visit, and you don't want your kids to visit. And then I want to change that conversation around. I want to say, okay, what is it that we can learn? Because there's multiple things we can learn. I'll just give you one example. In 1989, before mobile phones, there were more fixed phone lines in Manhattan than in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. And you would have to wait 5, 6, 7 years to get a phone line. And then mobile phones came in. And if you want to look at a society that runs on mobile phones, go to Africa. everybody's got two phones, at least two phones. But the Kenyan government, for example, has now set up an app that if you are a farmer and you want to grow a bit of rice or maize or whatever it is, or milk, and you want to sell that to government, you can sell that to government and they will put money on your phone. You don't need a bank account. You don't need anything else, but you can transfer money onto your phone. So what they've done is immediately have created, empowered and enabled a whole area of the population that was previously disempowered and disconnected. And they said, no, you are in the system. You're in the system. Nigeria has 213 million people population, more or less. 70% of those populations, 68, 69% of those population, live on less than $1 a day. So the question is, if we're going to look at how do we bring those countries into what we consider, they may not consider it, but we consider a more advanced state. To use your phrase, Zoran, technology allows you to leap 3 generations, to leap from 1950s to 2025, 2030. And there are places in Africa where if you go there, their basic fundamental use of mobile phone technology is way beyond what we see in Europe. Why? Because they've jumped ahead of us because we don't need it. For us, it's an add-on. For them, it is a transformational change. So let's talk about that. Let's think about how, why is it that the Global South is considered as a shorthand for dysfunctionality? And B, can we change that dialogue? And please, what I want to see is questions in the Q&A from everybody, please. And I also, because we've got Zoran and Nadine here. If you think you have something to say, please feel free. Put your hand up, or let me know in the chat, or let me know in the Q&A, and I will bring you. I will enable your mic. We'll bring you in, and you can have a chat and tell us what you think. I want to open this conversation up. Especially if you are from the Global South, because what we are doing here is we're doing a typical thing, which is we have basically educated white North, global North people talking about Global South problems, which is why we wanted Sheila here and a couple of other people, which I accept and I acknowledge this is not a good looking screen when we're discussing the Global South, and I acknowledge that we did do our best. But if you have something to contribute to that conversation, please do feel free to come in. Nadine, let's come to you. Is it true that the term Global South is a shorthand for dysfunctionality, and how can we change that dialogue?
To be honest, I didn't see it quite as negatively as you have put it earlier when you were
What Nadine has just done is she's just said what everybody wants to hear, which is Dr. Rubin's interesting theory. I'm not sure I agree with you. And everyone goes, "Oh, good. Okay, now it's going to get interesting." Right. So Nadine, go for it. Well done. Good.
No, I don't. I mean, I see. I believe I understand how such perceptions may have been formed in the past, but I think it is an outdated perception, because if I think about the Global South, I think about a region which is very vibrant, where there are a lot of development opportunities, and also where I see a lot of innovation. But then I suppose I need to provide perhaps a little bit more background to what I've done professionally in the past, because I have worked in Southeast Asia for the last sort of 20 years. I have spent 1.5 years in Kolkata, for example, so it was quite interesting to hear you talk about Lagos, because Kolkata, I think, probably is not that far behind in terms of the madness that you have described. So I have had to learn to negotiate many things of my life as well. And I've also worked in partnerships in Malaysia, in Vietnam, in Myanmar. So I'm somebody who has had quite a lot of experience of working with nations, and also with institutions, with individuals who are part of what we would call the Global South. And I've also worked with students who have set up their own institutions, their own businesses, who have come up with incredibly innovative ideas around waste management, for example, around engaging with the farming community. So what you've just described, David, in terms of the app that farmers are using in Africa, a similar thing exists in Indonesia as well. So I suppose my view of the global south is very different. I think, yes, there are challenges, and probably in some parts of that region, these challenges are very, very severe. They're very, very difficult. But at the same time, I also see it as a region where a lot of innovation is happening, and also where maybe in terms of the way of life, we have a lot to learn. And just sort of going back to the original question, so where does this perception come from, David? I think it's the value system is very different. So if I'm thinking, I mean, I grew up in Germany, and then I have moved to Britain for my studies. And if I think about the value systems that I have grown up with, they are very much around efficiency, around achievement. Very, very materialistic, particularly if you're thinking about the 80s and the 90s, where Europe was very much about economic growth, status, and all of that. Whereas I think in parts of the global south, the view of life, or basically what the purpose of communities is very different. So, for example, when I took up my first teaching job in India, never having been to Asia before, it was a complete shock, because there I was with all my rules and regulations that were drummed into my brain at Oxford Brookes University at the time, and I wanted to impose all of that onto my colleagues and my students, and it didn't work, because for them, the other aspects were simply more important. And David, I think this is probably where some of this perception comes from, because particularly in some European societies and Northern European societies, we have a particular way of living and a particular view of what matters and how things are supposed to be run. Whereas, for example, in countries around Southeast Asia, that's very different. So you don't start the day with starting off straight away with meetings. No, you're not. You have a chat. You form relationships. You take it easy. And you just need to let go of the idea of a schedule. And I mean, David, we've seen that in Indonesia as well when we were working with Build on the project. I mean, none of my agendas, for example, were followed to the T. There was always a little bit of movement. And I think it's just that difference in cultural approach. And it does take a time, I think, to for those different cultures to come together. And I think what we're seeing now here in the UK, across Europe, is that there is a much, much bigger focus on work-life balance, of being engaged with your families, with your communities, looking at yourself, mindfulness. So where does all of that come from? It doesn't come from Northern societies or Western societies. It is something that is based in spirituality of the East. So, I don't think that there is an easy question or an easy answer to the questions that you've said. So basically, where do these perceptions come from, and how do they change? I think the answer to that discussion or to that question is very, very multi-layered. But I'm going to stop now, because otherwise I'm just going to keep rambling on.
It's interesting what you say. I mean, I've lived in Germany as well. I've lived in Japan. Those are probably the two most, controlling. And there's no question about it. If you say, what is the single word that describes the requirement for this city to function, or this society, it is conformity. Your job is to do what you do, to stay in the lines, to park in the right way, to put your bottles out on the right day, to put your plastics out on a Tuesday and your paper out on a Thursday, and to put that in a green bag, not a red bag, and to stand in line. And all of those things, those micro social interactions, which basically say this is the way the city rules. And it's a bit like Disney World. Disney World has this idea of freedom, but actually it is incredibly controlled. And if you drop one piece of paper, within 4 seconds, somebody dressed as Mickey is going to say, sorry, we do not do that here. To try and transpose that into, an Indian or an Indonesian or an African context, it is not, like they say, if you ask a fish to ride a bicycle and it can't, it's not the fish's fault, it's your fault. And those expectations that we can transpose it